obviously bleeding from somewhere.
And they heard screaming in the early morning.
Kenda and his team must look beyond the surface to solve this mystery.
Her first words out of her mouth are, "Am I being questioned as a suspect?"
The glove compartment turned out to really be Pandora's box.
Then, a gathering of local artists turns deadly.
The body's just a canvas. It's just like an artist that would be painting something.
He thought he was plagiarizing other people's work.
He says, "You've got a 50-50 chance." Puts the gun to his forehead. You can become very calloused in this line of work. This work will change you. It changed me. I have seen people at their worst. I've seen death by every means. People are capable of anything.
It's Monday morning. "18-year-old Bill Brantner opens his eyes to what he assumes will be another ordinary school day.
The dreaded moment for a high school senior. Monday morning, 6 o'clock, time to go to school, rolls out of bed.
Hey, little dudes. Come on, it's time to get up. Come on.
You're the oldest brother, and your younger brothers depend on you. It was important to him to make sure that his younger brothers were taken care of.
As his younger brothers wake up, Bill hunts for something to wear.
Hey, Mom, have you seen my red sweater? Hey, Mom!
And he's not getting an answer from her, and this is beginning to get under his skin. And so,
Mom!
off on the quest to find his mom.
Mom?
So Bill goes into his parents' bedroom looking for his mother, doesn't see her,
Mom?
but he hears the shower running,
Mom?
sees the steam coming out and thinking, okay, my mom's in there taking a shower.
Assuming his mother simply can't hear him, Bill pokes his head into the bathroom.
And then he found something that he would never want to find.
Oh my God.
He sees his mom and thinks maybe she's knocked herself unconscious, and then realizes that she's not moving at all.
Across town, Lieutenant Joe Kenda is busy going about his own morning routine.
Hey, Kath, have you seen my yellow tie?
Oh, I had to throw it away. It was covered in blood.
You wind up with blood in your clothes. You wind up with all kinds of things in your clothes. So you wear cheap suits in this line of work because you wind up throwing them in dumpsters all the time.
Then, just as Kenda is about to take his first bite of pancakes, he receives an all too familiar call.
It's Kenda.
I know who it is. I answered the phone. I said, "Okay, I'll be right there."
Call me when I get a chance.
Half an hour later, Kenda arrives at a house on a cul-de-sac in northeast Colorado Springs.
This time of day, you have families getting kids out to school, families leaving to work. So they're kind of astonished to see law enforcement hanging out in their neighborhood.
I don't think anybody's at fault. Hey, Lieutenant.
Brian? So what do you got this early in the morning?
42-year-old Cheryl Brantner. She was found in the bathtub by her 3 young children.
She was a maternity nurse at Penrose Hospital. I mean, here was this lovely little family, and now the mom is gone.
Where's the husband?
He had already left for work. He still hasn't been told yet.
So we're thinking this is an accident, a slip and fall?
I think so. As far as we can tell so far, yeah.
Let's take a look.
Patrol responded to this call, and they called for us because they're not sure what happened here.
The first thing Kenda and his men notice is the location of the body.
A bathroom is usually the most dangerous room in your house. There's all kinds of things in there that can hurt you and might even kill you. But the primary thing that goes wrong is you fall in the tub.
A faint stain of blood is also present around the rim.
Mind if we take a closer look? She's obviously bleeding from somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't see anything on this side.
There are no other apparent wounds or injuries on her back. It's difficult to see it from her position, but she has a head injury of some type.
Let's turn her over. See the cut over her right eye?
Yeah.
We're probably looking at an accident. She obstructs the drain with her body. The water fills up and she drowns.
I don't see any signs of a struggle.
No.
It will be up to the coroner to confirm the cause of death. In the meantime, detectives search the bedroom for signs of foul play.
We still don't know enough about this to know whether this is an accidental bathroom death or did she get assaulted by somebody, by an intruder, by her husband, by her son.
Blood spatter on the walls, nor around the bed.
Yeah, look at the bed. What do you make of that?
All the blankets, all the sheets and pillowcases and everything are stripped from it. Nobody does their laundry at 5:30 in the morning. People just get out of bed. So why is it that all the bed linens have been removed?
Or can help us look for more blood.
So we have CSI do a visual inspection of the bed. There's no blood on the bed. There's no blood above the bed. There's no marks anywhere.
Anything?
I got nothing.
Where they holding Cheryl's sons?
They're out with Officer Duffy in the kitchen.
Good luck. Thanks.
"18-year-old Bill Brantner sits at the table with his brothers, Scott and Mike.
It's extremely difficult to discuss a violent death with children, particularly when it's their mother that's the victim.
Guys, I'm real sorry about this. I know how tough this must be. I just want you to know that I'm here to help.
I just can't believe this is happening.
Two of these boys are real young, and the reality of the circumstances has overwhelmed them. They don't know what to say, what to do, how to feel, how to react.
Can you tell me what happened?
Well, I had just gotten up and went in to speak with my mom, and that's when I found her.
Yeah, where was your father?
At work. He always leaves long before then.
The boys say that their dad, Bob Brantner, is a vocational arts teacher at a local high school. He likes to go to work early.
Did any of you notice anything unusual before then? Like overnight?
And the little one nods his head affirmatively. The older boy, Bill, notices that little one did that and thinks about that for a second.
There appears to be some subliminal communication going on between them.
Come on, guys, you can tell me. Did you see anything?
Well, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I guess it was about an hour before my alarm went off, and we did all hear her scream.
Screaming.
Screaming before dawn? There's a reason for that. People who accidentally fall and then drown in running water don't scream first. Who respond to a report of an accidental drowning in a bathtub of a 42-year-old Cheryl Brantner. We've now discovered through her eldest son that she was screaming an hour before he discovered her at 6 a.m. in the bathtub.
We stirred a little, but Scott was the one that went to check on her.
Well, when I got to my parents' store, it stopped. So I thought she was fine, and I went back to bed.
So I asked these boys, why would you think she was okay just because she stopped screaming? And they all explain that their mother suffers from terrible nightmares. There are something called night terrors that are worse than nightmares, where people actually become physically distraught.
Help! No! Help!
Shh, shh. It's okay. Shh. It's okay.
The boy's explanation seems perfectly logical, but Kenda has another important question.
Were your parents fighting this morning?
Mom and Dad?
I don't think I've ever seen him argue.
Can you think of anyone at all that might want to harm your mother or even your father?
They know the people in the neighborhood. Nobody that they knew of had any ill will against them.
Well, again, I'm very sorry about this. If you can just stay here with the officers, I'll make sure you get your father back as soon as possible.
And we are now left with the unenviable task of informing him that his wife is no longer alive.
It's only 9 a.m. when Kenda and Ritz arrive at the high school where Bob teaches. Administrator Mary Ann Welch escorts Kenda and Ritz to the wood shop on the first floor.
All right, we're gonna split this in two.
Excuse me, Bob. There's someone outside that needs to talk with you.
I'm in the middle of class. What's this about?
I don't know, but it's urgent. Don't worry. I'll take over.
Okay. Take notes on this radio, okay? I'll be back.
I've done this too many times, but a sharp knife cuts clean.
I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Mr. Brandner, but your wife was found dead this morning.
That can't be. She was fine this morning. She was fine. What happened?
Looks like she hit her head, drowned in the bathtub. We're still waiting on the exact cause of death from the coroner.
No.
I'm very sorry.
So he is pretty distressed, of course, and we invite him to go to the teacher's lounge, which happens to be close by.
Just then, Kenda gets a page from the coroner's office.
I tell Ritz to go find a phone and call them and find out what the deal is.
It is. Lieutenant, I think I can borrow you for a minute? Excuse me for a second. You're not going to like this. What is it? Coroner's report came back and said that she died of subdural hematoma.
There is a deep bruising of the brain tissue resulting in fractures to various veins and arteries resulting in goodbye.
So even if she did fall and hit her head, it probably wouldn't inflict that much damage. And that's exactly what he's saying.
The victim had been struck repeatedly.
Now the game changes because it wasn't just falling and hitting her head on this tub. She died of multiple blows to the head. So that's not really something you do to yourself.
The coroner will rule this as a homicide and not an accidental death.
Which means Bob Brantner isn't just a grieving husband. He's also a potential suspect.
Obviously, Bob has a lot of questions to answer.
I transport Bob down to the Police Operations Center for the purpose of an interview. I'm relieved at that point from that to go back to the scene to conduct further investigation into the crime scene. Now we're looking for signs that might explain the blunt force trauma.
Meanwhile, Back at the school, Kenda has a few more questions for Mary Ann Welch.
How long have you worked with Mr. Brantner?
I've known him over 10 years. I know his wife Cheryl and their 3 boys. They're all wonderful people.
She goes on to say that Bob is not only a great husband and father, but he's a Boy Scout leader. He is a dedicated public school teacher. He is Mr. Middle America.
As he leaves, Kenda asks Mary Ann to help him with one more thing.
Do you know where his car is or what kind of car it is? So she describes it to me and tells me where it's parked.
20 minutes later, Kenda's forensic officers are searching Bob's truck.
They have the means to open an unlocked vehicle without difficulty. So we're in the car.
Take a look in the glove compartment, see if there's any papers.
Yes.
It's the usual stuff we all have. Registration, proof of insurance, some receipts.
Then, something unusual catches Kenda's attention.
So I read the first 2 lines. I just have to write you and tell you how happy I am. I love you with all my heart, now and forever.
Looks like a love letter.
It is. But I don't think it's from his wife.
And it's signed LDZ. You cannot contrive Cheryl out of LDZ. Now, who the hell are you?
It was at this house in the Vista Grande area where Cheryl Ann Brantner was discovered dead, face down in a bathtub. Police say it wasn't an accident, and the 3 children there, aged 11 through 18, are key witnesses.
While searching Bob's truck, I find a love letter from a female whose name isn't Cheryl, LDZ.
We clearly have a love triangle. We don't know where the other woman is.
We possibly have a motive for killing. Could she have done it to get Bob? Could Bob have done it to get his new girlfriend?
The forensic team continues searching Bob's truck, and it isn't long before they turn up more incriminating evidence.
Hey, Lieutenant.
What is it?
There's some bloody sheets.
Well, my, Bob. What are you doing with these in your truck?
It's now clear why the bed had been stripped so early in the morning.
Lieutenant Kenda, Detective Ritz.
Go ahead, Lieutenant.
I'm headed back to the scene, but in the meantime, can you have CSI take a closer look at Bob and Cheryl's bedroom? It appears that she was killed on the bed.
Enforcer.
Kenda makes the crosstown trip to the Brantner residence.
I'll tell you what, I'll talk to you in a bit, okay?
Waiting for him is Detective Ritz, whose team continued to process the home while Ritz himself canvassed the neighborhood.
The next quest is to find the mysterious LDZ.
Looks like we may have another suspect. I found the love letter in the vehicle, signed with the initials LDZ.
LDZ. Hang on a second. I got something for that.
This sparks interest in me because I remember talking to somebody in the neighborhood that those initials fit. I check my notes. I'm able to show that this individual is Laura D. Zurchner.
She lives 2 doors down. She wasn't home, but the next door neighbor gave me her name.
Well, looks like she is now. I'll go talk to her.
All right.
Excuse me, ma'am. Lieutenant Kenda, can I ask you a few questions?
When I talk to her, I show her a badge, and she's not real surprised, which I thought was interesting.
Am I being questioned as a suspect?
And my response is immediate. Is there a reason why I should be questioning you as a suspect? She says, no, I know. I've already heard what happened, so I figure you now know that Bob and I are an item.
I never set out to have an affair with him. It just happened that way.
Can you tell me about it?
Laura explains that unlike Bob, she's divorced, raising 2 kids by herself.
Her kids belong to the same Boy Scout troop his kids do. He's the leader of the troop. She's always admired him, but 2 years ago, it turned to be a romantic relationship.
This was a long, slow, cultivated relationship. And who knows really what her ultimate goal is. It appears that it probably was to marry Bob.
She said last time she saw Bob was that morning. Well, that's interesting. Was that before or after Cheryl was dead?
I make lunches for him every day, so he came by to pick it up.
Was he acting strangely at all?
No, he seemed normal to me.
We may have some questions for you later. Thank you.
Kenda's willing to accept half of Laura Zirchner's statement at face value.
Just from a practical standpoint, Cheryl Brantner was a large woman. Laura is a little slip of a woman. It would be very, very difficult for her to overcome Cheryl in the first place and move her unconscious. So this whole pattern says to me, Laura is not part of it. Bob is. Bob's the only part.
Excuse us for a second, sir.
A discovery in the bedroom further confirms Kenda's hunch.
As I walk closer, it's a 3-foot length of 2x4, and it's got blood on it.
It's the missing piece of the puzzle, and all he needs to finally bring this case to a close.
They didn't find it initially because it had been stuffed behind that heavy wooden headboard, out of sight.
Looks like Bob's got some explaining to do. How you doing, Bob?
Fine. Why am I being kept here?
He's sitting there being very calm, and I explain the evidence against him, and he says, listen, I can explain. Well, please do, Bob.
We had a big argument last night. I told her that I met someone else and that I finally wanted a divorce. Cheryl, we need to talk.
And how did Cheryl take that?
She was mad, of course. You're not happy, I'm not happy. Our marriage is not working,
Our
okay?
marriage is not working because you're out with
Listen,
Laura
stop.
regularly.
Stop. She said she knew about the affair with Laura and that I wouldn't have the right to anything because I was cheating.
So you snapped?
Yeah, she was making threats. She wanted to make my life difficult.
They decide to go to bed and talk about it in the morning, but in the morning, the fight continues. And Cheryl becomes so angry, she shoves Bob.
Have you thought about anybody else besides you?
So how'd she get the injury on her head if she shoved you?
I lost it. I lost it and shoved her back, and she hit her head on the headboard and started bleeding.
So he said she was disoriented, but she was alert and she was angry. She said, I'll take care of my head. Just get out of here.
So I left. And I guess because she was out of it, she slipped in the shower and drowned.
I think you forgot a few things. Would you like me to go over what I think you forgot?
You get to have your whore. That's what you get.
She didn't hit her head in the bedstead, Bob. She hit it on a 2x4 that happened to be in your hand at the time. You wailed on her with that 2x4 and you killed her. That's why you took her nightgown off. Then stripped the bed so there was no blood evidence to be seen. Then put her in the tub, face down, started the water in order to stage this looking like an accidental fall and a drowning. Those are some of the things you forgot.
Stand up, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for murdering your wife.
On February 18, 1994, Robert Brantner is found guilty of murder in the second degree and is sentenced to 40 years in prison.
There's other ways to get out of a relationship. Murder's not the best one.
Here is a man who leaves his 3 children to find their naked mother dead in a tub full of water. All because he wants someone new to make his lunch. This is why humans are so difficult to understand and so dangerous to behold.
Coming up, the death of a young artist takes Kenda deep into the Colorado Springs tattoo scene.
Ego can be helpful in terms of you maintaining a level of success, but too much ego can be destructive.
Officer Robert Beekler is patrolling the graveyard shift on the west side of Colorado Springs.
It was October, early morning actually, and the bars had been closed for an hour or so, and things seemed to be pretty quiet around town.
Help me! You gotta help me! You gotta help! Come with me! Help! Come on!
Okay.
That's right! Come on!
The young woman is waving her arms as to get his attention. She's frantic. She's not able to tell him what the problem is. She's just kind of pointing as if she wanted him to follow him up the road.
Get the f off me, man! Guys, please, here, guys!
He has to physically insert himself between the 2 guys to separate them.
Get on the ground now!
And then orders them to remain on the ground.
2 Adam 38, start me some extra units as soon as you can.
He's calling for backup.
Do not move, you understand me?
And he looks over, and in one of the doors open into the townhouse, and he sees somebody dead lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
Within a half hour, Lieutenant Joe Kenda arrives at the scene and what appears to be a late-night party gone horribly wrong.
Hey, Lieutenant.
How you doing? So what we got?
Our victim's a 22-year-old Philip Titus. He was shot and already deceased when I arrived on scene.
Any idea who shot him?
No, there's 2 guys fighting when I pulled up. Separated them, but they wouldn't say anything.
Interesting. All right, let's take a look at the scene.
Okay.
On the coffee table are a set of tattoo needles and tattoo ink bottles of various colors. Tattoo artists are very talented. This is freehand art of great detail on human skin. They have a technique that is unique to them.
The body's just a canvas. And the artwork that they have on them is just like an artist that would be painting something.
Kenda turns his attention toward the victim, Philip Titus.
He has a blood-soaked towel wrapped around his head.
Can I get a look?
Sure can.
His eyes are open. The fact that his eyes are open indicate instantaneous death. So the gun was pressed right to his head. He's on the floor in the premise with a single gunshot wound to the forehead. It is star-shaped. It is very common in pressure contact wounds that when the bullet is fired, the general energy expended from the muzzle will cause a 5-point star fracture of the bone.
You pull up the shirt. I'll get a look at his tattoos.
Kenda wonders if the tattoos can offer any insight.
Tattoos tell a story. Different words or different colors that people put on their bodies that can identify them as being gang members. Or prison tattoos. As a police officer, look at somebody and think, that tells me that they had this kind of lifestyle.
Now the designs aren't tied to any local criminals.
They are tattoos for the sake of tattoos. He is a tattoo enthusiast.
Okay, look underneath him.
Sure can.
We find the expended slug, which has exited his head, and it's under his right shoulder, and it's the .38 caliber pistol round.
Kenda has the officer search the room for the pistol to go with the casing.
Here's the pistol. It's a .38.
We only got some gray matter in the barrel there.
Yeah.
When people say the expression, it doesn't have any gray matter, it really is true. Brain tissue is gray. Battleship gray.
So we have a gunshot victim, we have a firearm. What we don't have is who pulled the trigger and why.
To answer those questions, Kenda needs one of these tattoo artists to talk.
Any witnesses?
I have the two guys that were fighting when I pulled up. Their names are Dave and Jeff. One says the other shot his friend.
You know which one?
Everybody has gone strangely silent, but David Pinello, he's the tenant. He's reluctant to sign a search waiver for the police, and that certainly raises the level of concern that your reluctance could mean guilt or involvement.
Before questioning Dave and Jeff, Kenda wants to know what transpired before the shooting. And then he spots a young woman standing nervously on the sidewalk.
Bring me the girl in the blue top right there. Thank you. Tell me what your name is?
Cindy Davis.
She explains that this was a gathering of artists. They all tattoo each other for free and discuss things, techniques, new equipment, and about their business.
Need another hug. Cool hand. We started drinking early evening. Everybody was in a good, fun mood.
According to Cindy, with the booze flowing freely, the tattoo guns continued to buzz late into the evening.
Stop right now.
Oh, hilarious. You know, it's not gonna...
Come on.
Hey, no, guys.
And a fight breaks out that's not really a fight. It's more like a play fight, laughing and shoving.
But Cindy says that when Philip Titus tackled his fellow artist, David Pinello, the roughhousing got out of control.
Whoa.
Now, instead of a play fight, it turns into a real fight.
Next thing you know, there's a gun.
Who had the gun?
And she looks at me, and then she looks at Dave. Well, David, you and I need to have a long talk. We're talking to Cindy Davis about the events of the evening. She reports that a play fight became a real fight.
All right, you guys.
Jeff's tattoo ink got spilled, and the fight continues, and a gun gets involved.
Right now, signs point to Dave Pinello, the man who earlier tried to prevent police from searching his apartment.
So we need to separate him from this group and talk to him individually.
Dave, I'm Lieutenant Kenda. I need you to tell me what happened tonight.
Man, I drank way too much.
You remember pulling out a gun and using the gun to Philip?
No way. This is my best friend. I've never hurt him.
So I said, well, David, help me with something. Why do you hesitate to sign a search waiver to allow the police to look in your house? Is there something in there you don't want us to find?
I was worried about the gun. I guess it's kind of
illegal. I didn't register it.
So the gun is yours?
Yes. Yes, it's my gun. I bought it on the street. I didn't mean for anybody to get their hands on it. Are you gonna charge me with possession or something?
He was very concerned for the fact that he didn't have it, quote, registered. But the reality at that time was there was nothing illegal in his actions. Firearms were not required to be registered with the police department.
Dave may be off the hook for a firearms charge, but he's still a prime suspect in the murder of Philip Titus.
And you used that gun to kill Philip tonight?
No, that's not what happened, man.
Dude, just chill out.
Man, come on. Phil grabbed me up off the chair, right? And we're wrestling and we're just messing around.
Seriously? All right, crew. Whoa! Whoa! Seriously, guys?
And he knocks over the table with the tattoo equipment on it. Jeff becomes very upset with that.
Jeff, I'm sorry, man.
What the hell?
Hey, Jeff, hey, I'm sorry, man. Phil, what the hell, man? Calm down.
All right, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, hey.
What the
Dave claims that even though Philip took the roughhousing too far, Jeff's reaction only made matters worse.
He says that Jeffrey is so angry that his tattoo ink has been spilled and his needles have been scattered.
Sorry. Sorry.
What the?
Damn it! I'm sorry. Calm down.
Look, it's really not a big of a deal. Look, it's fine. There's not even a mess. We didn't even spill anything. It's fine.
Hey, that's hey, put that gun back in my room.
It's not so funny now, is it?
He's got this gun in his hand and he's saying things like, I could kill every one of you.
Come on, guys.
This isn't funny, man.
You worthless piece of Calm down, Jeff. It was an accident. What are you going to do with the gun?
Then, according to David, Jeff unloads the gun, takes the 2 live bullets out, and he puts one back in, closes it, cocks the hammer, and says to the victim, you've got a 50-50 chance.
You're crazy.
Then he puts the gun to his forehead and pulls the trigger, and kaboom. And Philip is dead before he hits the floor.
Dave's statement matches the evidence that Kenda and his men have recovered from the crime scene.
Why would Jeff get so upset about his tattoo kit getting knocked over?
Beats me, man. It was just like $40 worth of equipment.
All right. Hang out here for a little longer.
In the homicide business, when you have a simple killing, it's called a grounder. Your killer hits a ground ball to the shortstop and they throw him out at first. And that's what this has become. It's a grounder.
Jeff, step over here. Put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for murder.
Jeffrey Walker, you're under arrest for murder. We handcuff him and take him out.
Kenda needs to find out why Jeff would murder Philip over what amounted to an accident.
So Jeffrey is not only cooperative, but amazingly honest. He is advised of his rights, he waives. He admits it. Yes, I shot him. And then he explains why.
I was working on this tattoo, right? It's a really beautiful piece. A lot of detail. Putting it on a friend's arm. And, we've been at that thing for weeks. Tonight, I was putting on the finishing touches. It's really delicate, really fine, really detailed work. And here I am, focused on my art in the zone, really into it. These idiots ruin everything.
Come on! Oh, hey, man.
That was awesome.
Oh, man, I'm sorry. Hey, Phil.
Well, it's a tattoo. That's going to be a permanent mistake. It's not something that you can wash off.
They have ruined his artwork. The ultimate sin, preventing a tattoo from being correctly done.
Jeez, man, it's not like that big of a deal.
Let me take a look. Let me see that thing.
Step the back, man.
Just calm down. What's your toy?
Jeff admits he was beyond furious when he went for the gun, but swears he never intended to kill Philip.
He came at me. He asked me to shoot him.
How do you mean?
You're not a good tattoo artist anyway.
He says that Phil taunted him, saying, "Why don't you just shoot me?" And he ignored him initially, but they'd all been drinking, and Phil wouldn't stop.
Come on, let's see it. Let's see you shoot me. Come on, Jeff. See what you got. You can't even do it. Do it. I dare you. Damn it!
Kenda suspects there's still more to the story. Sure enough, Jeff admits his contempt for Philip had been brewing for months.
He can ink a tattoo, but he's not a real artist. He's a thief. He just copies everything I do.
Copies.
Yeah, I've never seen him put an original piece on anybody. He just steals other artists' work and calls it his own.
It's common in the trade that you don't steal drawings from other tattoo artists.
All right, I'll go get a pad of paper and you can write that up.
Whatever.
Jeffrey Walter pleads guilty to second-degree murder and is sentenced to 26 years in prison.
26 years in prison is a big price to pay for a moment of rage that spirals out of control. It's probably, for Philip's family, not ever going to be enough because they're never going to get him back.
You have a sad formula. Take a gun, add an egotistical attitude, mix it all thoroughly with alcohol. Put this on a low simmer, and you wind up with one dead tattoo artist.
At 5:42 a.m., the harbor was still holding its breath, the water flat and dark like polished stone, when the call came in, clipped and trembling, a voice saying there was something on the rocks below the coastal walk, something that didn't belong to the tide, something that wouldn't move. Sydney was waking up, kettles clicking on, radios murmuring traffic, but down there the morning froze, the kind of freeze that sinks into bone and stays, because what lay half hidden by shadow and salt spray was not debris, not driftwood, but the outline of a life interrupted, a woman's body framed by sandstone and seaweed, hair matted with sand, skin pale against the black water, a scene so quiet it felt staged, as if the city itself had turned away. Police tape snapped in the wind. Cameras flashed. A headline was already forming, unspoken but inevitable, the words "cold case not yet attached," the shock still fresh enough to cut. Her name was Claire Houghton, 27, a graphic designer with a rented apartment in Newtown and a habit of walking home late after freelance deadlines. Friends describing her as careful, sensible, the kind of person who texted when she arrived safely, the kind of person who didn't vanish. On the night she disappeared, she had left a small gathering near Darlinghurst just after midnight, told a friend she'd grab a taxi, waved once, smiled, and stepped into the blur of streetlights and exhaust. She never made it home. By morning, the city learned her name through police briefings and grainy photos lifted from social media profiles. A smiling face under the word missing, the beginning of a story that would stretch and thin and fade, then harden into something colder. The scene at the cliffs gave little away. No purse. No phone. Shoes still on. No obvious signs of a struggle, at least not at first glance, and the ocean has a way of stealing evidence, washing fingerprints into nothing, turning timelines into guesswork. Detectives moved with a practiced choreography of bad news, measuring distances, photographing angles, noting the way the body rested as if placed rather than thrown. The bruising that might be impact, might be something else. Was it an accident? A slip after too much wine? A moment of imbalance at the edge? Or was it violence, careful and quiet, delivered under the roar of waves that swallow screams? The questions piled up before answers could form, and the public waited, breath held, for clarity that did not come. By noon, the community was buzzing. Talkback radio crackled with theories. A jogger said she'd seen a couple arguing near the path around 1 a.m. A taxi driver claimed a woman matching Claire's description had waved him down, then disappeared when another car slowed nearby. CCTV footage from a convenience store showed Claire buying gum, timestamp 12:38 a.m., her hair tucked behind her ear, alive, unafraid. Then nothing. A blind spot. A gap wide enough for anything to happen. Investigators canvassed the area, knocked on doors, collected statements that contradicted each other in small but important ways, the kind of inconsistencies that keep detectives awake and families pacing. The autopsy deepened the fog. Cause of death: blunt force trauma consistent with a fall, but with injuries that raised eyebrows. Marks on the wrists that could be restraint or could be misinterpreted bruising from rocks. A toxicology report clean enough to rule out impairment. Accidental death couldn't be excluded. Homicide couldn't be confirmed. The file sat in the gray space between, a place where cases go to slow down. For Claire's parents, who flew in from regional New South Wales with red eyes and clenched hands, the uncertainty was its own cruelty. They stood behind police at press conferences, faces stiff, listening to words like ongoing investigation, lines of inquiry, no suspects at this time, phrases that feel like answers but aren't. Weeks passed. Posters curled on lampposts. Tips flooded in, then thinned. A man with a history of assault was questioned and released. A local fisherman reported hearing a scream, then admitted he'd been drinking and couldn't be sure. The harbor gave up a scarf that might have been Claire's, then swallowed it back into doubt when fibers didn't match. Each lead promised momentum and delivered exhaustion. Detectives circled the same questions, tracing Claire's route again and again, mapping shadows, calculating steps, wondering how a woman could vanish on a lit path in a city that prides itself on safety. By winter, the headlines softened. Another case pushed Claire down the page. Internally, the file thickened with transcripts and photographs, but externally, the story cooled. A cold case is not declared. It becomes one by attrition, by the slow realization that tomorrow will look like today. Claire's friends held a vigil on the anniversary, candles guttering in the wind, names spoken into the dark. Her mother kept her phone charged, a habit that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. Her father learned the language of probabilities, of how unlikely doesn't mean impossible, of how closure is a word used by people who haven't stood on cliffs staring at water that refuses to answer. Years layered themselves onto the file. Technology changed. Sydney changed. The coastal walk was resurfaced, new railings installed, safety signage added, as if infrastructure could cauterize memory. A new generation passed the spot without knowing what had happened there, while those who did know felt a tightening in the chest every time they walked past, a muscle memory of shock. Inside the police archives, Claire's case waited, boxed and labeled, a weight measured in paper. Then came the re-examinations, the quiet ones that don't make news. A detective with fresh eyes noticed something small, a detail overlooked because it didn't fit any narrative at the time, a call logged anomaly, a phone that pinged a tower farther west than expected minutes after the convenience store purchase, a discrepancy brushed aside in 2001 because triangulation was crude and the margin of error wide. In the early 2010s, margins shrank. Software improved. Old data learned to speak. The phone hadn't been recovered, but its ghost lingered in network records, a breadcrumb trail that suggested movement, not a straight line to the cliffs, but a detour, brief, deliberate. The new theory didn't scream. It whispered. What if Claire had accepted a lift? What if the argument reported by the jogger was real, not domestic, but opportunistic? What if the fall wasn't the beginning, but the end? Investigators reopened interviews, some greeted by relief, others by irritation, the past clawing its way into present lives. Memories had softened, hardened, rearranged themselves. Alibis aged. Relationships ended. A name surfaced again, one that had been in the file from the start, underlined once, then not at all. A man who lived near the route, known to frequent late-night bars, who had offered rides before, who had no criminal record then, and little to tie him to anything except proximity and a vague unease that never quite reached probable cause. The family was told, carefully, that the case was active again. Active is another word that sounds like hope until you learn how fragile it is. They sat through briefings that avoided promises, learned to read between lines, to hear the emphasis on process over outcome. Each call from an unknown number spiked the heart. Each delay reopened wounds. The media caught a scent and returned, old photos recycled, timelines reprinted, the phrase cold case now stamped onto the story like a verdict. As the 20th anniversary approached, something shifted. Forensic reanalysis of fibers recovered from the scarf, preserved better than anyone expected, yielded a partial profile that hadn't matched anything in 2001. Databases grew. Matches became possible where none had been before. The profile didn't name a person, but it narrowed a field, drew a circle around a history that included an arrest for an unrelated offense years later, a DNA sample taken routinely and filed away, waiting for the right question. The right question arrived quietly, in a lab that hummed with machines and patience. Still, nothing was said publicly. Silence can be strategy or necessity. From the outside, it looks the same. Neighbors speculated. Online forums lit up with resurrected theories, some compassionate, some cruel. The harbor kept its secrets tied in, tied out, indifferent to anniversaries. And then, on an ordinary morning that promised nothing, police cars pulled up to a suburban house far from the cliffs, lights off, engines ticking, officers stepping out with a warrant folded in a pocket, the past catching up to the present in the most unremarkable place imaginable. For Claire's family, the knock came later, a phone call first, a request to sit down, words chosen with care because words can't carry the weight they're asked to bear. An arrest had been made, they were told, connected to their daughter's death, an arrest that would make headlines and reopen every memory they had tried to manage. Shock isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a ringing quiet, a sense that the ground has tilted just enough to notice. The city would soon read a line that promised resolution, a solved cold case, a stunned community, but inside the story, nothing felt finished. It felt like standing again at the edge, looking down at water that reflects the sky and gives nothing back, knowing that whatever comes next will not return what was taken, only rearrange the questions. And as the news began to spread, as names were withheld and speculation surged, the old photograph resurfaced once more, Claire smiling at the camera, unaware of the gravity that would attach to her image, the way a single night can stretch across decades, pulling a city into its wake, reminding everyone that some answers arrive late, and when they do, they bring as much unease as relief, leaving the echo of a question that never quite fades. What really happened on that path, under those lights, with the harbor watching and saying nothing? The arrest did not bring silence. It detonated it, a low-frequency hum that rolled through Sydney and refused to settle, reporters staking out sidewalks, neighbors peering from behind curtains, a name withheld but a life already dissected in fragments, age, occupation, past addresses, the kind of facts that feel harmless until they're sharpened into accusation. In police headquarters, fluorescent lights flattened faces as detectives spoke in careful tones about procedure, about charges pending, about the integrity of an investigation that had learned patience the hard way. Outside, microphones caught every breath. Inside, the file opened again, not as a relic but as a living thing, pages lifting, details snapping into focus, the past rearranging itself under new pressure. They said the break came from data, But data alone never tells a story. It only points, and pointing requires a hand willing to shake. The fiber profile that narrowed the field did more than that. It reframed the night, suggesting proximity not at the cliffs, but earlier, closer to the city's pulse, where neon bleeds into shadow and decisions are made quickly. Investigators trace movements with the humility that comes from knowing maps lie. The phone ping west of expectation became a hinge, a small angle change that redirected the whole arc. If Claire had veered, even briefly, then the narrative of accident frayed. If she had entered a vehicle, the ocean's alibi weakened. If she had trusted the wrong moment, the city's safety myth cracked. Witness statements, long dismissed as noise, were replayed like vinyl, pops and scratches included. The jogger's argument gained texture, not a couple, maybe, but voices rising, one sharp, one low, a pause too long to be nothing. The taxi driver's near miss took on weight, the way another car slowed, the way a window lowered. These were not proofs. They were pressures, applied evenly, patiently. A pattern emerged not of certainty, but of plausibility, the currency of warrants and warrants' consequences. The man in the suburban house had lived an ordinary life on paper, the kind that fills space without making waves. Work, commute, bills paid, friends who would later say he was quiet, polite, helpful with groceries. The kind of neighbor you don't remember until you have to. Years earlier, a minor arrest had slid him into a database, a sterile moment with a swab and a form, no prophecy attached. Time did the rest, storing potential until technology caught up with memory. When the match surfaced, it did not scream guilt. It whispered possibility, enough to open doors that had been locked by doubt. Interviews resumed with a new cadence. Questions sharpened. Dates were tested. Alibis were stretched until scenes showed or held. A former coworker recalled a late night, a borrowed car, a joke that landed wrong. A bartender remembered a man lingering after closing, watching the door, offering rides to women who declined and then accepted from someone else. None of it alone could carry the weight, but together they bent it. The city watched the process through leaks and speculation, through phrases like significant development and ongoing proceedings, learning again how justice moves slower than rumor and faster than healing. For Claire's family, the days blurred into a sequence of rooms and voices, legal terms that felt like a second language, assurances that avoided absolutes. Relief pressed against dread, a bruise of emotion that changed color by the hour. An arrest promised answers, but demanded endurance. They learned that resolution is not a finish line. It's a corridor with doors you didn't know existed, each opening onto another question, another image, another sound from a night you never saw. Defense lawyers entered the frame with the calm of people who make storms navigable by insisting they are weather. They spoke of circumstantial evidence, of contamination risk, of how time corrodes certainty. They raised the ocean again, its appetite for erasure, its ability to manufacture accidents. They questioned memory's reliability, the ethics of retrofitting old facts to new theories. In doing so, they sharpened the edges of the case, forcing prosecutors to choose what mattered and discard what didn't, a ruthless clarity that left no room for romance. Behind closed doors, the accused sat with counsel, expression unreadable, a face now famous without consent. He denied everything. He said he'd never met Claire. He said he'd been home. He said the fibers meant nothing, the pings were noise, the witnesses mistaken. He said the city wanted a story with an ending. The room absorbed the words without reaction. Rooms are good at that. Outside, the word solved had already attached itself to headlines, an optimism that ignored how fragile cases are until a verdict makes them solid. As pretrial hearings stacked up, the timeline was rebuilt plank by plank. Midnight bled into morning with forensic precision. The convenience store purchase anchored reality. The detour reoriented it. A possible stop, a brief argument, a drive that took too long for no reason. The coastal walk loomed not as the site of origin, but as the site of disposal, a place chosen for its plausible deniability. The injuries were reconsidered through that lens, not the randomness of a fall, but the choreography of force, the way bodies carry stories even when water tries to wash them away. Community reaction fractured along familiar lines. Some wanted certainty now, a clean ending to a dirty story. Others recoiled at the idea of a man's life collapsing under evidence they didn't understand. Online, the case became a Rorschach test, revealing more about belief than fact. The phrase "cold case solved" traveled far, printed and shared, a talisman against fear. But detectives, wary of jinxes and reversals, avoided it, knowing how often confidence invites collapse. The harbor remained indifferent, but the path changed character. People walked slower. They looked at the railings. They noticed the distance to the water. The city remembers in odd ways, through muscle and habit rather than monuments. At night, the lights still traced the curve of the coast, but now they illuminated a story everyone thought they knew and no one could fully prove. In court, motions argued over commas and chain of custody. Experts spoke about fibers as if they were galaxies, each with its own rules. Telecommunications specialists translated pings into probabilities, circles on maps that never quite closed. The prosecution insisted the picture was clear when seen whole. The defense insisted holes are illusions built from parts that don't fit. The judge listened, expression neutral, a gatekeeper to narratives that would soon collide in front of a jury. For the family, each session was a reopening. Photographs resurfaced. Diagrams redrew the night. The name of the accused echoed through the room, now inseparable from their daughters. Shock returned in waves, not because of surprise, but because of proximity, the way answers move from abstract to intimate, and demand to be felt. They held on to each other, and to the idea that truth, whatever it was, mattered more than comfort. As the trial date approached, the city braced. Newsrooms prepared packages. Commentators sharpened takes. The accused neighbors dismantled assumptions about normalcy, realizing how little anyone knows about anyone else. And somewhere between data and memory, between ocean and concrete, the case hovered, balanced on the thin line between closure and collapse, reminding everyone that justice is not a headline, but a process that asks for patience it rarely receives. The night of the alleged crime returned to the public imagination with cinematic clarity, but the reality was messier, louder, quieter, full of moments that don't translate. That messiness would be the battleground. And as the first jurors were summoned, as the city leaned forward, the question hardened into something heavier than curiosity, heavier than fear, a question that refused to be softened by the word solved, a question that waited for voices sworn to listen and decide whether the story would finally stop moving, or whether it would keep pulling at the edges of Sydney, reminding it that some nights never end, they only change their light. The courtroom air was recycled and thin, the kind that flattens time until hours feel like minutes and minutes bruise into hours, jurors filing in with faces scrubbed of expression, carrying notebooks like shields, the judge's voice setting rules that sounded simple until they weren't. Listen only to what is presented here, weigh it carefully, set aside what you've heard outside these walls, as if a city could be switched off. The prosecution began without theatrics, a steady march through dates and distances, anchoring the jury to that last verified moment at the convenience store, the receipt held up like a talisman, 12:38 a.m., gum and water, a life mid-stride. From there, the line bent, deliberately, away from the coast, into streets that felt safer because they were familiar, the argument that chance does not need to be dramatic to be deadly, only proximate. They called the first witness, a technician who spoke of fiber transfer with the calm of someone used to skepticism, explaining how threads cling, how they migrate, how they tell stories when voices can't. A blue-gray filament recovered from a scarf that had waited patiently for its moment, now magnified and projected, reduced to data points that linked two lives across years of silence. The defense rose to object. Words like contamination and storage floated like smoke, but the judge allowed the testimony, reminding everyone that doubt was the jury's province. Pen scratched. Eyes flicked between screen and stand. The fibers settled into the room, not as proof, but as presence. Next came the phone records, translated into circles that overlapped and refused to close, probabilities stacked like coins, the expert careful to say could and might, careful to say not exact, but consistent with movement west, consistent with a stop that didn't fit the accidental narrative. The defense pressed, highlighting margins of error, suggesting coincidence, the way numbers can be persuaded to sing any tune. The expert did not bristle. He leaned into uncertainty, acknowledging it, insisting only that uncertainty did not mean randomness. The jury watched, learning how much justice depends on comfort with gray. Witnesses from the night resurfaced like ghosts asked to perform under bright lights. The jogger described voices again, the timbre, the pause, the feeling that something wasn't right, admitting how memory edits itself, how years had polish and doubt in equal measure. The taxi driver's story held its shape, a woman waving, a car slowing, a decision made too fast to analyze. The defense asked why he hadn't reported it sooner, why details had shifted. He answered with a shrug that carried shame, saying night's blur, saying he thought someone else would have called. The city's complicity flickered through the room, the way everyone assumes someone else will act. When the accused name was spoken by witnesses, it landed differently each time, sometimes with certainty, sometimes with hesitation, a syllable caught in the throat. A bartender placed him near the door after closing, lingering, offering rides. A former coworker recalled a borrowed car, returned late, an excuse that didn't quite fit. None of it alone could convict a person. Together, the prosecution argued, it formed a net, fine enough to catch truth. The defense countered that nets catch debris too, that patterns emerge where none exist, that the human mind abhors randomness and will invent order to soothe itself. The autopsy took the stand through photographs no one wanted to see, injuries mapped and remapped, experts disagreeing politely about force and angle, about whether wrists tell secrets or lies, about whether water can disguise intent. The ocean was invoked again, a witness that cannot be cross-examined, capable of turning push into fall and fall into myth. The prosecution leaned on placement, on the body's orientation, on the absence of certain abrasions. The defense leaned on physics, on chaos, on the danger of overreading silence. The jury listened, learning that certainty is a luxury rarely afforded. Outside, the media fed on the tension, headlines hedging now, adjectives softened, solved replaced with unfolds, arrest with trial, the city recalibrating its appetite for endings. Online, opinions hardened. Inside, the family sat rigid, absorbing every word, their grief professionalized by procedure, their memories reframed by strangers. Each mention of Claire's name felt like a theft and a tribute, both at once. Midway through the trial, the prosecution unveiled a timeline that attempted to braid everything together, the detour, the stop, the drive, the coast, arguing not inevitability but intention, a series of choices that narrowed until there were none left. They spoke of opportunity, of proximity, of a pattern of offering rides at night, of how trust can be a weapon when wielded without witnesses. The defense responded by dismantling the braid, strand by strand, suggesting alternative paths, alternative drivers, alternative interpretations, reminding the jury that absence of evidence is not evidence of presence, that the burden rests heavy and must be carried all the way. The accused did not testify. His silence was both shield and target. the judge instructing the jury not to infer, the room buzzing with the difficulty of that request. His counsel spoke for him, calm and relentless, framing the case as a cautionary tale about time's power to distort, about the danger of letting technology retroactively criminalize coincidence, about a city's desire to close a wound by stitching it to the nearest person. They asked the jury to imagine being wrong, to imagine the cost of certainty purchased cheaply. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom tightened. The prosecution's final words were measured, almost restrained, a reminder that justice is built from patience and inference, from the willingness to say this is what happened because the alternatives demand more leaps. They returned to Claire, to her last known moments, to the detour that redefined the night, to the fibers and the pings and the witnesses who saw fragments of the same truth. They did not promise comfort. They promised accountability. The defense closed by expanding the frame, urging the jury to step back, to see the gaps, the maybes, the reliance on what could have been rather than what must have been. They warned against letting a headline dictate a verdict, against confusing suspicion with proof. They spoke of reasonable doubt as a living thing, not a technicality, a safeguard against regret. The jury filed out to deliberate, the room exhaling for the first time in weeks. The wait began, hours stretching into days, the city hovering between narratives. For the family, deliberation was a suspended breath, a return to the worst kind of waiting, the kind that offers outcomes but no control. For the accused, it was a tunnel with no markers, silence amplifying every thought. For Sydney, it was a mirror held up to its faith in process. When the jury returned, the room rose as one, heart stuttering, pen stilled. The foreperson's voice was steady, the words formal, their meaning seismic. Whatever the verdict would be, it would not rewind the night, would not drain the harbor of its secrets, would not give Claire back her future. It would, at best, draw a line under a chapter and leave the rest to memory. And as the first word fell, heavy and irrevocable, the city leaned in, bracing for an answer it had been waiting for since a quiet morning when the water was flat and the questions began. The verdict landed without drama, a word delivered in a voice trained to carry weight without emotion, a word that rippled through the room and then outward, into corridors and headlines and private spaces where people would receive it alone. Guilty. The sound of it was not loud, but it was final enough to rearrange faces. Claire's mother closed her eyes, not in triumph but in surrender, as if the muscles holding her upright finally released. Her father stared straight ahead, jaw set, absorbing a conclusion that answered one question and ignited 1,000 others. Across the aisle, the accused exhaled sharply, a reflex more than a reaction, the realization that a life measured in years had just been recalculated. Outside, cameras caught the exit, the choreography familiar, police forming a human channel, lawyers shielding their client from lenses that tried to turn a man into a symbol. The word solved returned to headlines with renewed confidence, paired with shock, closure, justice served. The city wanted to move on, to fold the story into its archive of resolved horrors. But resolution is rarely clean. It leaks. Sentencing came weeks later, a ritual that pretends to balance scales that never sit level. Victim impact statements filled the room with language raw enough to cut through legal varnish. Friends spoke of birthdays missed, of empty chairs at weddings, of the way a name becomes a trigger. Claire's sister described the night of the disappearance as a line dividing before and after, a permanent crease in time. The judge listened, expression grave, then spoke of deterrence and accountability, of harm measured not only in loss of life, but in the erosion of trust. The sentence was substantial, the numbers heavy, years stacking into decades. Applause was forbidden. Silence did the work. In prison, the man became an inmate number, a routine built to dull edges, days marked by count and clang. He filed an appeal, as expected, challenging the fibers, the pings, the witnesses, the net. Appeals are promises without guarantees, lifelines tossed into deep water. Legal analysts debated chances on evening panels, their language tidy and abstract. For the family, the appeal was a reopening disguised as process, a reminder that the system never fully lets go. Time resumed its uneven march. The coastal path filled again, footsteps overlapping the memory of that night, tourists pausing for photos where others once paused to grieve. A small plaque appeared near the railing, modest, easy to miss, a name etched into metal that warmed in the sun and cooled at dusk. The harbor kept moving, tides faithful and unremarkable. Then, years later, a letter surfaced. It arrived without ceremony, addressed in careful handwriting, postmarked from a facility far inland. Its contents revealed first to lawyers, then to police, then, cautiously, to the family. In it, the inmate wrote of guilt, but not the one that had been adjudicated. He spoke of the night, yes, but his version slid sideways, introducing another presence, another vehicle, another set of hands. He claimed fear, claimed panic, claimed he had not pushed but had failed to stop what followed. He named a man who had died 2 years earlier, a drifter with a record and no one left to contradict or confirm. He said the fibers could have transferred earlier, that the pings could be coincidence, that the truth was messier than the verdict allowed. The letter detonated a quieter bomb. Police reopened a narrow inquiry, not a full reversal but a verification, a duty to chase any claim that touched a closed wound. They checked records, traced the named man's movements, found him in the city that night, found nothing that tied him to the path except rumor and proximity. The appeal court reviewed the claims and dismissed them, noting inconsistencies, self-interest, the absence of corroboration. Officially, nothing changed. Unofficially, doubt crept back into conversations. Journalists revisited the case with a different tone, not accusatory but curious, the kind that thrives in the cracks between certainty and suspicion. Podcasts dissected the trial, episodes devoted to fibers and fall dynamics, to memory science and the ethics of cold case prosecutions. Listeners wrote in with theories, with stories of rides offered and refused, with confessions typed at 3 in the morning and deleted before dawn. The word solved began to wobble, not collapsing, but flexing. For Claire's family, the letter was a theft of peace. They had learned to live alongside the verdict, to let it anchor them when memories threatened to drift. Now the anchor dragged. They met with detectives again, listened to explanations that were careful and compassionate, reassurances that the conviction stood. They nodded, thanked them, went home to rooms that knew their grief too well. Closure, they learned, is not a state but a practice, something you do every day with varying success. The accused, now older, quieter, filed no further letters. In interviews denied and appeals exhausted, his story calcified into the one the court had accepted, with footnotes that would never be read by jurors again. He became a reference point in law lectures about circumstantial cases and evolving technology, his name footnoted beneath discussions of fiber transfer and data pings, a caution and a precedent. Sydney absorbed the aftershocks in its own way. The case entered folklore, told differently depending on who was speaking, a warning about rides and trust, a testament to persistence, a debate about proof. The coastal walk remained beautiful and treacherous, a place where the line between safety and danger is a railing and a decision. Years later, a storm tore through the harbor, waves slamming rock with old fury, salt spray rising like breath. After it passed, a jogger found a rusted key tangled in kelp below the cliffs, an object without context, meaningless until it wasn't. Police examined it, traced it to a lock long replaced, a door in an apartment once rented by someone who knew Claire. It led nowhere. Most things do. The city moved on, because cities must. But at night, when the path is quiet and the lights draw their careful line, the story lingers, not as a solved case or an unsolved one, but as a reminder that truth is often assembled, not discovered, that justice can be both decisive and incomplete. The harbor keeps its counsel. The plaque warms and cools. And somewhere between a verdict and a letter, between data and memory, the night of 2001 continues to breathe, asking questions in the sound of water against stone, questions that no sentence can fully still. The years that followed taught the city a strange lesson about endings, how they pretend to seal a story while quietly multiplying its footnotes. Schools invited legal experts to talk about cold cases and technology, about how patience and progress can reach backward in time, and students listened with a polite attention reserved for cautionary tales that feel distant until they aren't. Claire's name surfaced in these talks, anonymized at first, then restored as an example of persistence rewarded, a life honored by process. But outside classrooms, in kitchens and late-night conversations, the talk softened into questions that never quite found a home. The harbor path became a place people mentioned when discussing safety, the way they mentioned intersections after accidents, and awareness stitched into habit. Runners adjusted routes. Couples lingered less at the edge. The railing felt sturdier than before, though it hadn't changed. On anniversaries, flowers appeared and disappeared, the ritual imperfect but sincere. Tourists paused, read the plaque, took photos of the view and moved on, carrying a piece of a story they wouldn't know how to hold. Inside the police department, the case lived on in training modules and quiet debates. Some detectives cited it as proof that no file is ever truly closed, that evidence waits for the right ears. Others warned about overconfidence, about the risk of letting modern tools retroactively harden theories that once floated. They spoke in conference rooms and over coffee, respectful but unresolved, professionals grappling with the same tension the city felt, the desire for certainty versus the duty to doubt. Claire's family adjusted to a new normal that included being recognized in grocery aisles, offered condolences years late by strangers who meant well. They learned to answer the same questions with variations that preserved their energy. Yes, there was a conviction. Yes, there was an appeal. No, they didn't want to speculate. They kept Claire present in smaller ways, recipes passed down, a sketch framed in a hallway, a dog named after a place she loved. Grief learned to coexist with routine, a quiet tenant that paid rent by reminding them what mattered. Then a documentary aired. It promised balance and delivered tension, archival footage cut against moody sound design, interviews interlaced with reenactments that blurred fact and feeling. The filmmakers insisted they weren't reopening wounds. They were examining process. They gave airtime to experts who challenged the fiber evidence, to psychologists who explained memory's pliability, to former jurors who spoke carefully about reasonable doubt and the pressure of attention. The inmate declined to appear, his absence filled by speculation. The series ended without a verdict, a choice that angered some and relieved others. Public response split along familiar fault lines. Some accused the documentary of undermining justice, of exploiting tragedy for clicks. Others praised it for courage, for reminding viewers that certainty is rare and humility necessary. Online, comments spiraled into camps, each convinced the other was naive or cruel. The word cold case trended again, stripped of context, repurposed as content. Lawyers watched with interest. A pro bono group requested access to evidence, citing public interest. Prosecutors resisted, citing finality. Courts sided with caution. The law values stability, and for good reason. But stability can feel like indifference to those still asking questions. The tension hummed beneath the surface, a low note that never resolved. Meanwhile, technology marched on. Algorithms improved. Pattern recognition grew more subtle. Researchers published papers about fiber transfer under different conditions, about how long materials persist in saltwater environments, about false positives and cumulative probabilities. Each paper was a pebble dropped into the case's pond, ripples overlapping until the surface shimmered with possibility. None were decisive. Science rarely is. An unexpected voice joined the chorus when a retired detective gave an interview, careful but candid. He spoke of the early days, of pressure to classify, of how accidents soothe institutions while homicides demand resources. He admitted to doubts he'd carried quietly, to moments he wished he'd pushed harder, earlier. He did not accuse colleagues or courts. He framed doubt as a companion to experience. The interview went viral, not because it revealed new facts, but because it validated an unease many had felt without permission to name. For the family, the noise was exhausting. They declined interviews, limited appearances, protected their peace with boundaries that sometimes looked like silence. Silence, they learned, is often mistaken for agreement or defeat. In truth, it was survival. The inmate aged. Hair thinned. Shoulders rounded. In a facility where time is measured in routines, he attended programs, taught basic skills, wrote letters he never sent. Guards described him as compliant, unremarkable. Psychologists noted denial mingled with resignation, a common blend. Whether guilt lived there was a question no assessment could answer definitively. The system is built to manage bodies, not souls. On a quiet afternoon, a storm warning rolled across the city, the harbor shifting color as clouds gathered. Sirens tested their voices. People checked windows. In a small office downtown, a researcher re-examining archival phone data noticed an anomaly, a blip dismissed years earlier as interference. It aligned with nothing else and therefore meant nothing, until it didn't. She flagged it, wrote a memo, sent it up a chain that had grown tired of reopening chapters. The memo received a polite acknowledgement and no action. Most memos do. Life continued. The city celebrated festivals, mourned new tragedies, forgot and remembered in cycles. Claire's story drifted in and out of public consciousness, tethered to anniversaries and media releases. Each return felt smaller than the last, like a wave losing energy as it travels. Yet beneath the surface, the case remained active in the only way that matters sometimes, in the minds of those who refused to stop thinking about it. Not because they wanted a different ending, but because the ending they had did not quiet the water. And so the harbor kept its rhythm, the path its lights, the plaque its warmth and cool, while a question persisted, not loud enough to command attention, not quiet enough to disappear, asking whether justice had found the truth or whether it had simply found a way to stand still long enough to be believed. By the time the case reached its 25th year, it had shed its urgency and acquired a patina, the way stories do when they become part of a city's texture rather than its pulse. New officers knew it as a benchmark, a lecture slide with bullet points about persistence and proof. Old officers knew it as a weight, a file that refused to sit flat in memory. The name still drew a pause in conversation, a brief recalibration, the recognition that some answers cost more than they give. The harbor path had been fitted with brighter lights, a municipal decision justified by statistics and optics. Safety initiatives need reasons, and this one had a ready-made narrative. Yet people who walked there late said the light did not banish the feeling, that something in the curve of the coast resisted illumination, that the dark pulled anyway, a reminder that visibility is not the same as certainty. The ocean accepted the light and reflected it back, fractured, an answer that looked like one and wasn't. A symposium on cold cases brought experts from across the country to a university auditorium, their presentations crisp and clinical. Fiber science had matured. Telecommunications analysis had grown humbler, more transparent about error. One speaker used Claire's case as a hypothetical, stripping names to protect feelings while sharpening points about inference stacking. In the Q&A, a student asked whether juries can ever truly understand probability. The speaker paused, then said understanding is less important than trust, a response that landed unevenly. Trust was the currency the case spent freely and replenished poorly. Each new analysis asked for it. Each documentary drained it. Each official denial tried to bank it. The public learned to toggle between belief and skepticism with a speed that felt modern and brittle. The inmates' appeal rights expired quietly. No press conference marked the moment. A clerk stamped a document. A notification went out. Finality, in the legal sense, arrived without ceremony. It should have brought peace. It did not. It brought a different question. What happens to doubt when there is nowhere left for it to go? Claire's family marked the anniversary privately. They chose a beach north of the city, wind-cut and empty, where the sand squeaked underfoot and the horizon was clean. They spoke her name without microphones. They laughed once, surprised, then did not apologize. Grief, they had learned, does not follow rules. It improvises. Back in the city, a journalist chasing an unrelated story stumbled into an old witness, a woman who had moved suburbs and lives, who had once told police she saw nothing because she did not want to be involved. Time had loosened her fear. She remembered a car idling near the path, engine uneven, a man leaning out to speak, another shadow in the back seat that did not move. She remembered thinking it was none of her business. She remembered the sound of waves covering the end of the exchange. The journalist listened, recorded, verified what could be verified, which was almost nothing. The story ran as a sidebar, cautious, framed as memory and regret rather than revelation. Police acknowledged it and filed it. The ocean remained unmoved. Online communities amplified the account, spliced it into existing theories, argued over its timing. Some saw vindication. Others saw the unreliability of late recall. The debate was louder than the content, a familiar pattern. Truth became a team sport, jerseys chosen early. In a lab, a researcher continued to test fiber persistence under simulated coastal conditions, salt, abrasion time. Results suggested transfer could occur indirectly, via seats and clothing, complicating narratives built on proximity. The paper passed peer review and joined the literature, cited occasionally, never decisively. Science advanced by inches. Cases demanded miles. The police department faced its own reckoning as oversight tightened and historical reviews proliferated. A task force audited old cases for bias and tunnel vision, not as accusation but as improvement. Claire's file was reviewed again, redacted, summarized, scored. The conclusion was careful. The conviction met the standard of the time and remained supported by the totality of evidence. Footnotes acknowledged evolving science. The report satisfied administrators and left skeptics unmoved. For the family, the report was another object to store, another piece of paper with weight disproportionate to its size. They placed it in a drawer with other documents, a private archive of a public tragedy. They learned that documentation does not equal understanding. The city experienced new shocks, new cases, new headlines. The old ones receded, except when storms or anniversaries pulled them forward. The harbor path hosted a charity run, banners flapping, laughter echoing. Life asserted itself with the indifference of momentum. One evening, a maintenance crew replacing a railing panel found a scratch pattern inconsistent with erosion, a series of marks that suggested impact. They photographed it, logged it, sent it to a supervisor who sent it to police. An officer compared the marks to old photos, shrugged at the ambiguity, closed the loop. The marks were probably recent. Probably became the most honest word attached to the case. In a classroom, a professor asked students to argue the case from opposing sides, not to decide guilt but to map uncertainty. The exercise ended with no consensus and an uncomfortable silence. The professor said that was the point. The law is an engine built to produce outcomes, not truths. Truth, when it appears, is a byproduct, not a guarantee. As years accumulated, the case's gravitational pull weakened, but did not vanish. It tugged at conversations about safety, about evidence, about how communities metabolize violence. It served as a mirror for the city's self-image, reflecting both resolve and impatience. At night, when the path emptied and the lights hummed, the harbor spoke in its old language of repetition. Water met rock. Foam dissolved. Somewhere between data and memory, the story persisted, neither fully settled nor fully open, an unresolved chord that refused to resolve, reminding anyone who listened that time does not solve cases. People do, and people are fallible, and sometimes the best they can do is hold a question long enough to learn how to live beside it. The city's relationship with the case entered a quieter phase, the kind that doesn't announce itself but alters behavior in small, telling ways. Late-night transport campaigns featured silhouettes and slogans about getting home safe, their fonts clean, their messages blunt. Rideshare apps added prompts, share your trip, check in, trust your instincts, advice that felt new until you remembered how old the fear was. None of it mentioned Claire by name, but the omission felt like acknowledgement, a shadow cast by an absence everyone recognized. In a suburban library, a book club chose a true crime title and spent an evening arguing ethics instead of endings. They talked about victims turned into content, about families who never consented to be case studies, about how attention can be both memorial and intrusion. One woman said she'd walked the harbor path every week since the verdict and still couldn't decide whether the city was safer for it. The group laughed nervously and moved on, the question lingering like a bookmark slipped between pages. The inmate marked another birthday behind concrete, candles replaced by fluorescent glare, wishes pared down to manageable hopes. He declined an interview request, then another. In a letter to a relative, he wrote about dreams that returned him to water and light, to a path that curved away from him no matter how fast he walked. He did not mention names. He did not mention guilt. He mentioned time, how it thickened, how it slowed, how it could feel like mercy and punishment at once. Meanwhile, a retired engineer who had once worked on cellular infrastructure wrote an op-ed challenging the confidence with which pings were interpreted in early 2000s cases. He cited terrain, load, weather, maintenance cycles, variables that turned certainty into suggestion. The piece circulated briefly, then sank beneath newer debates. Police responded with a statement emphasizing corroboration. The exchange added another layer without moving the needle. At the university, a graduate student requested access to anonymized case materials for a thesis on narrative coherence in jury decision-making. She found that jurors gravitated toward stories that minimized randomness, that replaced coincidence with intention, even when instructed to resist. Her findings were unsurprising and unsettling. She defended successfully. Her work joined a shelf of scholarship that cases like Claire's quietly support. A community forum invited questions about the case's legacy. An officer spoke about diligence. A counselor spoke about trauma. A city planner spoke about lighting and design. In the back row, a woman stood and said she'd once accepted a ride from a stranger near the path and nothing bad happened, and she didn't know whether that made her lucky or the story incomplete. No one answered. Applause filled the gap. Then came the storm that changed the coastline just enough to matter. Heavy rain loosened rock. A section of the cliffs slumped, revealing strata unseen for decades. Geologists surveyed. Engineers assessed risk. Among the debris, a fragment of fabric surfaced briefly before the tide reclaimed it, its color indeterminate, its relevance unknowable. Someone photographed it. Someone sent the photo to police. It was logged and dismissed. The ocean has a way of offering and retracting in the same breath. In the archives, a clerk digitizing old audio discovered a tape mislabeled, a scratchy recording of a tip line call from the week after the death. The caller spoke quickly, nervously, about a car seen idling, about laughter that cut off abruptly. The call had been noted, summarized inaccurately, then shelved. The recording added texture but no clarity. Investigators listened, nodded, placed it back into the digital stack. Another footnote. The family chose not to engage with these flickers. They had learned the cost of every new maybe. Instead, they focused on a scholarship established in Claire's name, modest but real, awarded to students whose work bridged art and community. Each year, a recipient wrote a letter of thanks, unaware of the full weight behind the name. The letters mattered more than headlines. Across town, a group of amateur sleuths met monthly, their theories evolving with each new scrap. Some believed the conviction ironclad. Others believed the letter, the storms, the late witness. Arguments grew heated, then ritualized. The case became a lens through which they examined authority and doubt, less about Claire than about themselves. They meant well. Meaning is not the same as help. In a hospital ward, a man unrelated to the case drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering names that nurses noted and forgot. He died without confession or connection. Death often arrives without revelation, an anticlimax that defies narrative expectations. As the city aged, so did the case's language. Words softened. Shock gave way to legacy. Cold case gave way to precedent. The plaque remained, its edges smoothed by touch and weather. Someone added a small sticker once, removed by morning. Memory resists curation. On the path one night, a couple argued quietly, then laughed, then walked on. A runner slowed to tie a shoe. A security camera hummed, recording nothing remarkable. The ordinary reclaimed the space, not as denial but as survival. And yet, in the pauses between sirens and waves, the story held. It held in the way people glanced toward the water. It held in the way experts hedged their words. It held in the way families guarded their peace. The case had become less about a single night and more about how a city lives with what it cannot fully know, how it builds rituals and railings and sentences, how it teaches itself to accept that some truths are partial, some endings provisional, and some questions too heavy to be set down, carried instead like a quiet ache that reminds you you're alive. Time did what time always does when stories refuse to settle. It thinned the noise and sharpened the edges. The case stopped arriving as a headline and started surfacing as a reference, a shorthand used in debates about proof and patience, invoked with a nod rather than a gasp. For newcomers to the city, it was history. For those who remembered the morning of the call, it was muscle memory, a tightening at the ribs whenever the harbor went still. In a quiet office overlooking Parramatta Road, a legal aid attorney reviewed old transcripts for a continuing education seminar and paused on a cross-examination that felt too gentle. He reread it, then again, noticing what wasn't asked, what wasn't pressed. He wrote a margin note, missed leverage, and moved on. Lawyers are trained to keep going. Regret is inefficient. Across town, a forensic archivist cataloged evidence standards from the early 2000s, the era when analog habits met digital ambition. She noted how storage practices varied, how labeling drifted, how the chain of custody was often intact but rarely elegant. Claire's scarf appeared in the database as an example of preservation done right by accident rather than design. She smiled briefly at the irony and kept typing. The inmate was transferred to a different facility, a logistical shuffle that mattered only to those who tracked such things. In the new place, the routine was stricter, the faces unfamiliar. He wrote fewer letters. In one he did write, to no one in particular, he mentioned the harbor without naming it, the way light fractures on water, the way distance makes some memories brighter. Psychologists would later note the language as nonspecific, a coping strategy, or a mask. Labels are cheaper than answers. A podcast host announced a limited series revisiting unresolved questions in resolved cases. The trailer promised nuance. The episodes delivered atmosphere. They used sound to imply what facts would not, waves and footsteps, and static layered beneath careful narration. Listeners wrote in with chills and certainty. Critics wrote in with concerns about inference and harm. The host responded with a statement about storytelling as inquiry. The argument cycled as it always does. Meanwhile, a small advancement in materials science made its way from lab bench to conference poster, a method for distinguishing primary from secondary fiber transfer under certain conditions. The method was promising, limited, expensive. Someone asked in the hallway whether it could apply retroactively. The answer was a practice maybe, followed by a shrug. Funding prefers the future. The police department, facing public pressure on unrelated matters, released a transparency report that included a section on legacy cases. Claire's file was summarized in neutral language, timelines and outcomes listed without adjectives. The report satisfied regulators and irritated everyone else. Transparency without revelation feels like fog with rules. On the path, a city crew installed a new camera with a wider field of view. A sign announced its presence. Some residents felt safer. Others felt watched. Both were probably right. Technology, like memory, changes behavior without guaranteeing truth. The family attended a graduation for a scholarship recipient, clapped politely, posed for photos they did not share. The student thanked them for turning loss into opportunity. The phrase landed awkwardly, heavy with good intention. Afterward, they walked by the water, said little, and went home. Grief had taught them to prize quiet. An academic journal published a debate piece about the ethics of post-conviction storytelling. One author argued that public doubt corrodes trust and re-traumatizes victims. The other argued that silence protects error and empowers complacency. Both cited the same case without naming it. Readers recognized it anyway. The footnotes carried more weight than the prose. In a storage room beneath a courthouse, a box shifted when an HVAC unit rattled to life. Inside were exhibits long returned to anonymity. Paper flexed. Plastic aged. Objects waited without expectation. Evidence does not care how it is remembered. A man who had served on the jury years earlier spoke to a reporter on background. He described the moment deliberations tipped, not a single fact but a feeling, the alignment of fragments into a shape that felt complete enough. He admitted he still wondered, sometimes, whether completeness was the same as correctness. The quote did not make the article. Ambivalence rarely does. Storm season came again. The harbor darkened and brightened in quick succession. Sirens practiced. The city rehearsed resilience. After one storm, a volunteer group cleared debris along the path, working quietly, efficiently. Among the trash, they found nothing that mattered, which was a relief and a disappointment in equal measure. Late one night, a rideshare driver stopped at the curb near the old convenience store location, now a cafe with warm light and exposed brick. A passenger hesitated, then climbed in. The driver glanced at the clock, unaware of anniversaries, aware only of the route ahead. The city moved. What remained of the case lived in these in-betweens, in the spaces between action and interpretation, between what could be tested and what could only be felt. It lived in the refusal of the water to speak plainly, in the human urge to finish stories even when they resist endings. And as another year folded itself into memory, the question did not grow louder or quieter. It grew older, seasoned by time, still asking whether the line drawn under that night was a boundary or a pause, whether truth had been reached or simply arranged, and whether the difference mattered to anyone still listening to the sound of waves against stone, counting what can be counted and letting the rest go. The distance between certainty and acceptance widened with age, a gap the city learned to step over without looking down. People stopped arguing loudly about the case and started referencing it obliquely, a nod here, a raised eyebrow there, a shared understanding that some stories don't end so much as thin out. The harbor path aged gracefully, salt and sun softening its edges, the railing bearing the quiet polish of countless hands. Safety became habitual. Memory became selective. In a courthouse office, a clerk sorting archived appeals paused at a familiar caption and felt the faint tug of recognition. She had been a teenager when the verdict came down, remembered the way adults spoke about it in lowered voices, as if the case could hear. Now it was a file among files, a spine on a shelf. She logged its status, closed the drawer, and went to lunch. Institutions are built on such moments, small acts of closure repeated until they resemble permanence. A criminology conference convened overseas, its program dense with panels about inference and innocence, about the sociology of doubt. One speaker referenced a case from Sydney without naming it, illustrating how communities metabolize uncertainty after legal resolution. The slide showed a simple graph, a tension over time, a spike, a plateau, a long taper. The room nodded. The model felt right. Models often do. Back home, a community college offered a night course on critical thinking using real cases. Students debated evidence thresholds, the ethics of post-conviction scrutiny, the emotional calculus of families asked to endure public doubt. A student who worked nights asked whether justice could be both necessary and insufficient. The instructor smiled and said that was the course. The class laughed softly, grateful for an answer that did not pretend to finish the thought. In a quiet suburb, a woman cleaning out a garage found an old notebook from the early 2000s, pages yellowed, a list of dates and times scribbled in the margin. She recognized one date, the night of the disappearance. Her notes mentioned a borrowed car, returned late, an argument she overheard through thin walls. She hesitated, then photographed the pages and sent them to a tip line that had long since become an email address. An automated reply thanked her for her interest and promised review. She waited for a call that did not come, then folded the notebook back into a box. The past had been offered again. The present declined. The inmate received a medical diagnosis that changed nothing and everything, a reminder that time's leverage applies to everyone eventually. He requested a transfer closer to family. The request was denied. He adapted, as people do. In a counseling session, he spoke about responsibility in abstract terms, about how outcomes ripple beyond intent. The counselor noted progress without conclusions. Therapy aims for coping, not confession. A local newspaper ran a retrospective on early 2000s policing, its tone measured, its sources diverse. The case appeared as one of several, contextualized rather than spotlighted. Letters to the editor followed predictable lines. One thanked the paper for balance. Another accused it of reopening wounds. The editor printed both. Balance is a posture, not a resolution. On the path, a memorial run raised funds for victim services. Runners wore shirts with slogans about endurance and hope. The route traced the coast, wind in faces, breath synchronized. At the halfway mark, volunteers handed out water and encouragement. No one spoke names. Names have weight. Movement felt easier. In a lab, a doctoral candidate replicated an experiment about fiber transfer under seating conditions similar to those described in testimony years earlier. The results were inconclusive, the variance wide. She wrote this plainly, resisting the urge to overclaim. her advisor approved. The paper joined a literature that grows more cautious with age. A television producer pitched a dramatized adaptation and was turned down by the family's representatives. The producer reframed it as fiction inspired by events. The project stalled. Inspiration without consent is a fragile foundation. The city marked another anniversary with rain. The harbor flattened, gray and reflective. A few people left flowers. Most did not. Memory does not require ritual to persist. It requires only return. Late one night, a patrol officer responded to a minor call near the path. Nothing serious, a noise complaint. While waiting, he looked out at the water and thought of the training module that mentioned the case, the bullet point about patience. He wondered what patience meant after decades. He cleared the call and drove on. In a classroom, a teacher asked students to write about a place that changed after a story attached to it. Several chose the path. They wrote about light and shadow, about knowing and not knowing, about how stories can stain and sanctify at once. The teacher graded gently. Some lessons aren't about rigor. As the year turned, the case settled further into its long middle age, no longer raw, not quite historical. It existed as a set of coordinates more than a narrative, points plotted on maps of law and memory. For some, those points connected cleanly. For others, the lines wavered. Both groups lived in the same city, walked the same path, listened to the same waves. And in that shared listening, something like acceptance took shape, not agreement, not certainty, but a practiced willingness to carry ambiguity without demanding it transform into comfort. The case did not end. It persisted, quieter, steadier, asking less of the public and more of the individual, a reminder that even when a verdict stands and a sentence is served, truth may remain a negotiation between evidence and belief, between what can be proven and what can only be lived with, as the harbor breathes and the city, at last, learns how to breathe with it. The city learned to speak about the case in the past tense without quite meaning it, a linguistic compromise that allowed dinner conversations to move on, while leaving a door ajar. Newsrooms stopped assigning anniversaries unless something new justified the ink. Editors called it restraint. Others called it fatigue. Both were true. Attention is a finite resource, and the city had spent a great deal of it learning how to sit with uncertainty. In a government office, a policy analyst drafted recommendations on post-conviction review standards, citing international models and local precedents. The language was cautious, verbs softened, thresholds defined and hedged. Claire's case appeared as a line item, anonymized, its lessons distilled into bullet points about transparency and proportionality. The analyst wondered whether lessons extracted from lives ever fully fit the page. She submitted the draft anyway. Systems require feeding. A retired judge gave a lecture about finality, his voice steady, his anecdotes precise. He spoke of the moral weight of endings, of how societies need them to function, even when they are imperfect. In the back row, a listener thought of the letter, the storms, the late witness, the scratch on the railing, the memos acknowledged and shelved. The judge's point held. So did the unease. Two truths occupying the same room. The inmate marked another year inside, the days compressing into routines that offered predictability in exchange for choice. He volunteered in the library, reshelving books whose spines bent like tired backs. He favored atlases, the promise of distance rendered safely flat. In the margins, he wrote notes he later erased, a habit that kept his hands busy and his thoughts from circling too tightly. Guards noticed the quiet. Quiet can be compliance or contemplation. The difference matters less than people think. Claire's family downsized, a practical decision framed as simplicity. Boxes filled with objects that had accrued meaning by proximity, programs, clippings, cards from people who meant well. They kept what mattered and let go of the rest, a sorting that felt like betrayal and mercy in equal measure. In the new place, light fell differently. They learned the angles. They made room for ordinary joys without apology. A city council debate flared briefly over funding for additional lighting along coastal routes. Proponents cited safety metrics and public perception. Opponents cited budgets and diminishing returns. Someone mentioned the case without naming it. The vote passed narrowly. Lights went up. The water reflected them as always, beautiful and unpersuaded. An investigative journalist, nearing retirement, wrote a long piece about the ethics of persistence, arguing that some stories demand continued attention not to overturn outcomes but to refine understanding. He included the case as an example of a narrative that taught restraint as much as resolve. The piece ran on a Sunday, read quietly, shared sparingly. The comments section remained civil, a minor miracle that felt like progress. At a legal clinic, students reviewed hypotheticals about cumulative inference, learning how small uncertainties stack and sway. One student asked whether juries should be given probabilistic tools. The instructor said tools help, but judgment decides. The student nodded, unconvinced. Education rarely closes questions. It teaches how to carry them. The harbor hosted a memorial service for victims of violence unrelated to any single case. Candles bobbed in paper boats, light trembling on water. Names were read. The sound carried and then dissolved. Someone thought of Claire. Someone else thought of someone else. Grief, like water, accepts many shapes. In a storage unit on the city's edge, a man cleaning out a relative's belongings found an old jacket with a faint blue-gray thread caught in the seam. He wondered briefly whether threads ever matter, whether coincidence ever stops being coincidence. He threw the jacket into a donation pile and moved on. Most people do. A review board met to consider whether emerging science warranted reopening any legacy cases. Criteria were discussed. Thresholds debated. Resources weighed. The board concluded that while science had advanced, no new method met the standard for retroactive application in this instance. The decision was unanimous and careful. It satisfied policy and left philosophy untouched. The path saw a proposal for a small installation, an artwork about memory in water. Public feedback split. Some welcomed a contemplative space. Others feared spectacle. The proposal was revised into something nearly invisible, a line etched into stone that caught light at certain hours and vanished at others. It was approved. On the first morning it appeared, few noticed. Those who did stood quietly and left. A teacher assigned a class to listen, to waves, to traffic, to silence, and write what they heard. One student wrote about how sound repeats without repeating, how each wave is the same and not the same, how that felt like the case everyone pretended not to talk about. The teacher wrote good on the page and meant it. As another year leaned toward its end, the city found itself steadier, not because answers had multiplied, but because expectations had adjusted. The case no longer demanded resolution to justify its place in memory. It existed as a lesson about process, about humility, about the limits of certainty when time stretches evidence thin. And so the harbor continued its work, waves arriving without regard for verdicts, reflecting lights installed for reasons that felt both sufficient and insufficient. The path held its traffic of feet and thoughts. Somewhere between closure and doubt, the story settled into a posture that allowed life to proceed without erasing what had been lost, a posture that acknowledged the sentence served and the questions remaining, and accepted, at last, that some truths do not announce themselves with clarity but persist as a low, steady presence, asking not to be solved, but to be remembered honestly. The last chapter did not announce itself as an ending. It arrived the way dusk does, gradually, a softening of edges until the city realized it was standing in a different light. The case slipped from conversation not because it had been forgotten, but because it no longer needed to be spoken aloud to be present. It lived in posture, in pauses, in the way people looked twice before stepping too close to the railing, in the way silence after certain questions felt heavier than any answer. Claire's name settled into memory with a quieter weight, no longer carried by headlines or arguments, but by association. A coastal breeze, a late walk, a moment of hesitation before accepting help from a stranger. She became part of the city's internal warning system, an instinct rather than a story. This was not justice as defined by courts, but justice as absorbed by a community that had learned, painfully, how fragile ordinary nights can be. The inmates' health declined in increments too small for drama. Medical notes replaced legal ones. Appeals were no longer discussed. They had become irrelevant to the body's timetable. In a final evaluation, a clinician wrote that he expressed regret without specificity, a phrase that satisfied no one and condemned no one, a clinical acknowledgement of a human tendency to circle truth without touching it. When the news of his death eventually came, it did so quietly, a brief notice buried beneath larger stories. No crowds gathered. No statements were demanded. The city exhaled, unsure whether to feel relief or nothing at all. Officially, nothing changed. The conviction stood. The sentence was recorded as served by circumstance. Files were updated, statuses amended, boxes relabeled. The law did what it does best at the end of a long road. It stopped. Finality, at last, achieved not by certainty, but by exhaustion. For the family, the news arrived without instructions. They received condolences that felt strangely out of season, grief revisiting with an unfamiliar face. There was no surge of emotion, no cathartic release, only a settling, like sediment after a storm. They gathered privately, spoke Claire's name, shared a meal, remembered details that had nothing to do with the case at all. The laugh she snorted when surprised. The way she folded paper. The future she never reached. These memories felt truer than any transcript. The harbor path remained, unchanged in all the ways that matter. People walked it unaware of conclusions and unresolved threads. Children ran ahead of parents. Couples argued and reconciled. Runners chased personal bests. The etched line in the stone caught the sun for a few minutes each morning, then vanished. Those who noticed it sometimes stopped. Most did not. Meaning does not require an audience. Years later, a student researching urban memory cited the case as an example of how cities metabolize trauma, not by erasing it, but by distributing it across habits and infrastructure, across lighting decisions and public warnings, across unspoken rules passed down without attribution. The paper argued that this diffusion was a form of collective survival. It was published, read by a few, forgotten by many. Its thesis lived on anyway. The ocean continued to do what it had always done, advancing and retreating, erasing footprints, returning fragments without context. It never testified. It never clarified. It held its role as the one witness that could not be compelled, a reminder that some elements of any story remain outside human jurisdiction. In the end, the case did not resolve into truth or doubt. It resolved into coexistence. A verdict and its shadows. A sentence and its questions. A life lost and a city altered. The phrase cold case, once sharp and urgent, dulled into history, then into reference, then into something closer to folklore, a cautionary echo rather than a call to action. And so the story closed the only way it ever could, not with certainty, not with revelation, but with continuity. The city went on. The water kept moving. Memory stayed uneven and human. What happened on that night in 2001 remained partially obscured, refracted through evidence, belief, and time. But its impact was clear enough, written not in files or verdicts, but in the collective awareness that some answers arrived late, some never arrive at all, and that living with that knowledge, without spectacle, without denial, is sometimes the most honest ending available. The epilogue did not feel like an addition so much as a lingering echo, the sound that stays in a room after the door has closed. People still reference the case occasionally, but now it surfaced the way weather does, as context rather than crisis. A question asked in passing. A pause before a decision. A glance at the water that lasted half a second longer than necessary. The city had folded the story into its instincts. In official language, the matter was finished. In human language, it never would be. That difference mattered less with time. The urgency to resolve softened into a responsibility to remember without distortion. Schools taught the case as an example of process, not spectacle. Police recruits learned it as a lesson in patience and humility, a reminder that investigations age, that evidence changes meaning as tools evolve, that confidence should always travel with caution. The Harbor Path hosted a dawn yoga class once a week. Mats lined the curve of the coast, breath synchronized with waves. The instructor spoke about grounding, about balance, about letting thoughts pass without clinging. Some participants knew the history. Some did not. All of them listened to the water and found something there, whether calm or unease, release or focus. Places carry many truths at once. A writer working on a novel sat on a bench nearby, notebook closed, choosing not to fictionalize the case. He wrote instead about cities and how they remember, about the quiet agreements people make with their surroundings. He understood that some stories resist transformation, that turning them into art can feel like trespass. He left with nothing written and felt it was the right choice. At a conference on restorative justice, a speaker argued that healing does not require perfect knowledge, only acknowledgement of harm and commitment to care. The audience debated definitions late into the evening. No consensus formed. That too felt appropriate. The case hovered over the discussion without being named, an uninvited participant that nonetheless shaped the room. The family continued forward. Birthdays arrived. Milestones passed. Claire was present in photographs and habits, in sayings that slipped into conversation unconsciously. They had learned that moving on does not mean leaving behind. It means carrying differently. On certain days, they walked the path and felt nothing remarkable. On others, the air felt charged, and they turned back early. Both were acceptable outcomes. In archives and databases, the case remained searchable, its keywords unchanged, its summary concise. Researchers would find it and read, some nodding, some frowning, some feeling the pull of unanswered questions. Most would move on to the next file. A few would linger, not because they expected to change the record, but because the record had changed them. The ocean, faithful to its indifference, kept shaping the coast. Rock wore down. New cracks formed. Old ones disappeared. The city maintained the path, replacing panels, repainting lines, updating signs. Maintenance is a form of care that asks for no conclusions. And somewhere in that ongoing maintenance, the case found its final form, not as a solved mystery or an open wound, but as a steady undertone in the city's story, a reminder that truth can be approached without being captured, that justice can be enacted without being complete, and that communities, like people, survive not by answering every question, but by learning which ones they can live beside. The water met the stone again and again, each impact familiar, each slightly different. Footsteps passed. Lights hummed. The night remained ordinary, and because of that, precious. The story's afterlife unfolded without witnesses, a series of small adjustments that never rose to the level of news. A line added to a training manual. A footnote in a policy draft. A cautionary slide in a lecture deck that ended with no takeaway beyond pay attention. These were not tributes. They were habits. the quiet infrastructure of memory doing its work without asking permission. On the path, a maintenance worker replaced a damaged bolt and paused to steady the railing, testing its firmness with a practiced shake. He did not know why he lingered, only that the spot felt like one that asked for care. He moved on, leaving the metal clean and secure, an action that would never be recorded as meaningful, and yet was exactly that. A sociologist conducting interviews about urban fear noticed a pattern she couldn't quantify. People described the city as safer than before, but spoke more carefully about trust. They checked on friends after nights out. They shared locations. They planned exits. The change was subtle, not fear-driven, more like maturity. She labeled it adaptive vigilance, and wondered whether every city has a case that teaches it this lesson. In a hospital waiting room, a woman scrolled through articles on her phone and stumbled on a brief mention of the case in a broader piece about coastal safety. She remembered the week it happened, how her mother had called every hour, how she'd rolled her eyes and promised she was fine. The memory surprised her with its clarity. She put the phone away and texted her daughter to say she loved her. The ripple moved on. A law student writing a note on appellate standards chose the case for a comparative analysis, not to argue innocence or guilt, but to explore how courts articulate confidence amid uncertainty. He concluded that the language of decisions often carries more assurance than the evidence alone can justify, not out of malice, but necessity. The note was published. It would be cited once, maybe twice. That would be enough. The harbor hosted a school excursion. Children leaned over the railing, counting waves, asking why the water changed color. A teacher answered what she could, and let the rest remain a mystery. She did not mention the case. She did not need to. The lesson was already there, written in the balance between beauty and danger. In a correctional facility far from the coast, a guard retired after decades of service. In an exit interview, he mentioned the inmate who'd kept to himself, who read atlases and erased his notes, who never spoke of the night everyone else spoke about. The interviewer nodded and typed a summary that reduced a life to bullet points. That is how systems remember. A grant proposal funded a study on public memorials that avoid spectacle. The etched line along the path was included as a case study, praise for restraint. The researcher argued that subtlety invites personal meaning rather than prescribing collective emotion. The committee agreed. The study moved forward. Somewhere, an idea about memory grew legs. On a rainy evening, a cyclist skidded and caught himself at the railing, heart racing. He laughed at his own clumsiness, then stood still longer than necessary, watching water gather and fall. Later, he would tell the story as a near miss with humor, unaware of how many such stories quietly echo one another, building a culture of caution one breath at a time. The family marked another year with a simple ritual, no announcements, no cameras. They cooked a meal Claire loved, talked about ordinary things, let the evening end naturally. They had learned that meaning does not require amplification. It requires presence. As seasons turned, the city continued to negotiate its relationship with the case, not through debate, but through design and behavior and the small choices people make when no one is watching. The story remained intact without being active, a background frequency audible only when the noise drops away. And when it did, when the wind eased and the harbor went flat, the question returned, not demanding an answer, not accusing, just present. What happened mattered. How the city responded mattered. What remained unresolved mattered too, not as a failure, but as a boundary marking the limits of what can be known. The water struck stone and receded. Lights reflected and broke apart. Footsteps passed and faded. The cave stayed where it belonged now, not at the center, not forgotten, but woven into the city's sense of itself, a quiet thread running through ordinary nights, reminding anyone who listened that some truths are not found at the end of a story, but carried forward, altered slightly with each step, as life continues along the edge of what it cannot fully explain. By now, decades had softened the sharp edges of memory without dulling their presence. The case had settled into the city's rhythms like an undercurrent, subtle, persistent, shaping movement and attention in ways that could not be quantified. People no longer spoke of it in urgency or horror, but it appeared in gestures, in hesitations, in the instinct to glance over a shoulder or check the paths lighting before allowing a child to run ahead. The harbor became a teacher of caution disguised as scenery. A local historian included the case in a lecture on urban narrative, contrasting it with events that had immediate resolution. Students leaned forward, curious, not for the thrill of unsolved crime, but to understand how societies integrate uncertainty. They asked about ethics, about memory, about the difference between justice and closure. The lecturer emphasized that stories persist in human behavior long after files are closed. The lesson said quietly, an impression more than a statement. The family carried on, with their lives in muted tribute. Birthdays were marked with small, private gestures, anniversaries with meals or flowers, evenings with stories that began and ended without the need for confirmation. They had learned that presence could substitute for intervention, that keeping someone alive in habit and memory could outweigh the compulsion to correct or comment. Grief became a companion, steady and silent, not a spectacle for public attention. In the prison system, the inmate's record continued to exist in bureaucracy, updated for health, programs, and compliance. He spent his days reading and learning skills that would never leave the walls. Occasionally, he traced lines in a notebook and erased them, a small ritual that neither confessed nor concealed. The guards recorded nothing remarkable. The law measures conduct, not reflection, and systems have no vocabulary for lingering doubt. Urban planners installed benches and discreet lighting along the path, framed views to highlight beauty without inviting recklessness. Commuters and tourists walked the space with ordinary curiosity. Students and casual joggers alike felt the rhythm of the coast, the friction of wind and salt on skin, without any conscious link to past tragedy. The lessons were embodied, implicit, existing in awareness rather than dialogue. Researchers continued publishing studies that referenced the case indirectly, in models of cognitive bias, memory degradation, or the ethics of re-examining closed cases. Each publication added marginally to understanding without changing outcomes. The work mattered primarily to those willing to follow footnotes and maps to trace patterns over time. The rest of the city operated in parallel, benefiting from vigilance without engaging with its source. Occasionally, media retrospectives appeared, brief documentaries, essays, or podcasts. They presented the case with restraint, emphasizing process over sensationalism. Listeners were invited to reflect rather than react. The family declined participation, choosing privacy over platform. The stories served as reminders that engagement is optional, and that reflection can coexist with discretion. Weather patterns shifted. Storms eroded rock slowly, tides washed away footprints, and the path's concrete and metal infrastructure required maintenance. Volunteers and city workers performed routine checks and minor repairs. The ocean continued its work, indifferent and consistent, a force outside judgment or narrative, reminding all who pass that time is neither fair nor unfair. It simply moves. One evening, an amateur photographer captured the harbor at dusk, waves folding light into patterns that echoed chaos and calm simultaneously. Viewing the photo later, they described a sense of tension resolved into beauty, a duality that seemed to mirror the city's long experience with the case. Art and memory intersected without commentary. The lesson was experiential rather than declarative. The city's collective consciousness held the case as a reference point, an internalized caution, a measure of how ambiguity shapes behavior and expectations. Legal systems, families, communities, and individuals each absorbed fragments differently, creating a mosaic that was coherent only in its shared existence. The narrative was no longer about crime alone, but about adaptation, endurance, and coexistence with the unknown. And as night fell, lights reflected across the water in fragmented shards. Footsteps echoed lightly along the path, and the harbor breathed in rhythm with the city. The story, unresolved yet integrated, persisted as a quiet, steady presence, teaching that some endings are not conclusions but continuations, not resolutions but states of attention, and that living alongside unanswered questions is itself a form of survival, perhaps the only one available.